That's a lot of light. Hello, everyone. I'm kind of half expecting Rashid Rana to arrive and come sit here. But I guess it may not actually happen.
I'll represent him.
Oh, good. Welcome, Leeza. And whoever is interested in joining us can come right here.
Where's my respondent?
So that was planned. Who is the respondent? I can't see. Just so I know everybody's names. I just start? Okay.
Oh, it's Beth.
Beth. Hello, Beth. My name is Omar. I'm the moderator, as it were. I am, as I am speaking, trying to make sense of the brilliances and surprises that have just unfolded in front of us. And it seems that the last presentation, Christopher's presentation, having to do with Rashid Rana's present elsewhere, or can the remote exist autonomously, presents the question of, I suppose, presence and absence. And I think this question was present, as it were, in all three presentations. So the question of something that's remote and its existence or presence or link with us. In Khalil and Joana's presentation, the question of, the true and the false, right? The true being a moment of the false, or the false being a moment of the true, and the scams, the falling for the scams, or the reality of the scams, and then all the different levels that your presentation worked through in terms of the reality of the people who write the scams, and their actual lives, etc. And also in Ruyan's talk, this kind of ever repeated effort to give a reality or a body or to make sense of a horizon that's ever receding, in a way, how to visualize it. So perhaps maybe after you've given us specific entries or an example in your lectures or performances, perhaps each one of you could say something about this question of presence and absence as you see it, maybe in the project you've presented, but in your work in general, if that makes any sense. How do you go from the specific presentation that you gave to more theoretical consideration of these questions? Does everybody have a microphone?
Yeah, I guess that is in a way a key question in most of our presentations, and I think in my presentation especially was really the question of the weak signal, or what counts as a weak signal that matter, and what counts as a weak signal that is just disregarded as political noise. And what I was really trying to map, so this is to give a bit of context to the presentation that I gave. So that was, you could say, a segment from a kind of longer lecture that I'm working on, and that is building on from a research that I've been doing in the past year that is looking at various, you can say, speculative programs or kind of futures-oriented programs in Singapore. So one of which being the Risk Assessment and Horizon Scanning program. And there are other programs such as the Smart Nation program, which some of you may have heard of. But what I was struck by was that in a lot of these programs or initiatives, the idea was that the kind of vocabulary that comes up, that was what I was most fascinated by, the notions of narrative, and of wanting to hear from the people. And very often, I was also very curious about these individuals who were employed across the civil service, who play the role of analysts, whose role is to kind of be the human in the machine, and how they come to sustain a particular performance, a social performance of what they're doing. And so often the emphasis is on the ability to speak or the ability to tell stories. But at the same time, that also begs the question of listening, which is something I kind of proposed at the end, but I didn't really have that much time to elaborate upon. So even when we have a certain discourse of empowerment, of telling people to tell their stories, I think the bigger question, and that is perhaps where we go into the question of absence and presence, is that even if you say something, what happens if that utterance is not legible within a particular political space? So I guess that was my kind of ending note that I wanted to reflect upon. Yeah.
Khalil, Joana.
We got one answer or two answers?
You can can go, yeah.
1.5. Absence was always very present, we can say, in our work, Khalil and me, on artistic research, because we worked a lot on traces, on latent images, lasting images. We worked on missing people, but I think what would be today, I feel more this idea of present and presence. See, so of course, it's, in all the SCAM projects, there's this idea of virtuality, and you have this possibility to connect with people that are totally absent, that you will never see. But in the same time, now this week especially, I think all the time of this idea, like, what are we going to do with this present? How are we going to be? What is going to be our presence to the world now? You know, it's more in this idea that I have this notion when you talk about absence and presence. Mm-hmm. You know, it's this idea of our present today. What are we going to be? Are we going to stay absent to it?
We, as filmmakers and artists, we were always considering that part of our work is to give a sensation of what we are not able to see, what is present, and the condition of the visibility is not there yet. This is all the work that we made on the latency, or after on even the condition of believing in an image or on a narrative in certain conditions. This is
would you give an example of a work, just for people who may not know your work very well?
For example, just after a war that happened in Lebanon in 2006, how we can believe in a specific narrative or in a story. So we decided to make an experimentation, and we asked an actress, Catherine Deneuve, to come and to see what are the conditions to be able to make a fiction after a war.
Random actress, you know.
Yeah. So it's really, it's always an experimentation. It's also, but with the war of 2006, we were also shifting to other strategy to negotiate in the realities, in the context where we are living, to try to enlarge the possibility of living there. Meaning, when we are bringing Catherine Deneuve, we are taking her to the borders and to see if her presence will allow us to make a film and to film in that specific place. It will be the same thing after with another project called the Lebanese Rocket Society, where we were unfolding or revealing a story that was completely hidden or forgotten in Lebanon, which was that Lebanon in the 60s had a space program. It seems that's a joke, but it's not. And and now with the scam, there's a continuation. I would say that it's always what are the conditions to believe in a story or in an image. So it's not just the presence or the absence, it's also the condition, because you can have something here, but the context will not allow you to see it. Like when the American took picture of the camps, this is what they were looking for, so they were not able to see it. This is why the film was called I Want to See.
On this question of presence and absence, I think what's fascinating for me is that Rashid's absence will always be stronger than my presence. And I agree that that was a consistency in the other two presentations as well. And what fascinates me is that the motivation for presence in Khalil and Joana, your presentation, is this idea of conviction, right, of belief. And then perhaps in Ruan's, you talk about the analyst, this notion of making noise into a positive value, and the analyst doing that. I mean, for me, the question I have for myself as well as for you guys in my response to this issue of presence and absence is really what it feels like to be on the absent side. What it feels like to be on the present side, but a present that is always subordinate to an absence. Does that make sense? So in other words, more bluntly or more obviously, the question is, what's the relationship between you guys and the scammers that you interview, and the kind of actors that you use to bring out these stories, or your relationship to the analysts that you incorporate and you use in your lecture? It's more a question than a response. Excuse me.
That's
for that,
great.
Omar.
But it's true. It seems that both presentations go from kind of theoretical question into the people behind it in a way, also.
The relationship that we have with scammers, from the beginning of this project, that there was this possibility that we would answer. Okay. But we didn't answer. We thought about it a lot. We did a special email to answer, and then we thought, no, we're not answering. It's not the right thing to do. It was more this idea of how do you embody trash? You know, a little bit what, you are not talking about that, but as an artist, like what do you do? We always wanted to do things with what is not noble. You see, what is like the trash, usually you don't really even look at them, you just trash them immediately. So we kept them, we thought about them, and we thought like, what can we do with that? So this idea of having them saying an alternative history of the world, or revealing the way we represent corruption and the way we think that corruption is only in certain places and not others, that show us like how we represent the world in a way and how it is false. And at the same time, the idea of having this actor saying something, and sometimes they are good. You can believe them. And at a moment, there's a rupture. And those actors, for example, when we were making this work with them, we just gave them the scam. You just have to say it. And then, you stay with them a little bit before and after. And you talk with them. And their stories were so incredible, so unbelievable. We thought like we can't leave them. We have to stay with them. So this is why we showed very short moments, but we stayed a lot with them, and we did for almost each one of them a film on his condition. And it's called It's All Real, because what is real, what is fake, at what moment, for example, Tamara, when she's talking about the experience of Viviane Salem, she's living it. So it's very difficult to say this is the victim, this is true, this is false, we are right, we are wrong.
You don't have to.
It's very rare moment.
So for me, I have been as part of the research for this project that I've been doing, so I've indeed been speaking to kind of various individuals, both inside and outside of Singapore, who identify as, they go by different names, but some of them, they call themselves critical futurists. So that is a term. And I was kind of interested, as I said earlier, about the kind of social performance that is sustained when they are taking on such a role. And
these are people who are working for the government within that program, or not necessarily?
So there is so the brain of this program is the Center for Strategic Futures in Singapore, which is housed under the Prime Minister's office. And that is really where the beginnings of these kind of futures programs started. And of course, the starting point was always on national security. But now, almost most of the major ministries in Singapore would have what they will call a futures group. And these people who are kind of identified for this kind of speculative labor would circulate between among these these bodies within the government. So that was one point of interest to find out, what exactly do they do? What goes into the kind of future craft that they are performing. And I guess as I was speaking to them, and most of them are, they're very socially liberal. And maybe just to give a bit of context, in the case of Singapore, is that we have. It's a it's essentially a city-state. It's a population of just 5.5 million, but it also has pretty much a single layer of government. So the amount of data that the government has at hand is quite unprecedented, or is quite incomparable to any other jurisdiction. And also the fact that 80% of the people in Singapore live in public housing. So that itself, which of course has its own, takes its own form in Singapore, the idea of public housing. So within such a kind of political ecology, you have a state that is of course very powerful, who has a lot of data, and the question is, how do they process these data? And speaking to some of these futurists, or people who do futures, as they call it, the kind of recognition that the awareness that they have of themselves is also that this is still a very kind of elitist undertaking. To be able to think about the future is ultimately a luxury that most people can't do, even as a kind of daily kind of civil servant or a state worker. You are too busy kind of fighting the fires every day to just sit in the corner and think about what necessarily would happen in 30, 50 years. And also, another point I was interested in was also how a lot of these programs in Singapore were framed through the schema of the nation. So for instance, the Smart Nation program that we have, which is our variation of the smart city, except that because we are both a city and a nation, it takes on a national framework. But then the question is that it becomes very problematic, for a country where over 30% of the people are foreign-born. And of that, about over 1 million are low-wage migrant workers. So the question that arises for me is that when you talk about the smart nation and you take nationality as almost a kind of basis for these programs, what happens to those who fall outside of citizenship? And that was, I guess, something that I was trying to allude to towards the end of the presentation. So what are the kind of signals that literally fall outside the range of the horizon scanning programs?
A possibly a related question. I was wondering when you were speaking how, in terms of that unprecedented amount of data that's at the hands of the state, how much of it is accessible by citizens or is potentially accessible by the public? I mean, to what extent can a citizen who is not working for the government be a critical futurist or a critic of the critical futurists in a way?
Interestingly, there is quite a lot of public data that the Singapore government has made available, maybe for private corporations or even the average citizen. So if you go to data.gov.sg, you would find all kinds of data and all kinds of data visualization that the government has released for the public. And I would say there are certain amounts of data, certain forms of data are highly accessible. But then, of course, the questions is what are the data that's not accessible? I think that becomes a more critical question. And very often when it comes to the more vulnerable populations in Singapore, that is the problem where there is lack of an institutional will to suss out the data. And with that data, we could do formulate certain policies or whatever, but that data is often lacking.
I was wondering if the respondent had a response to offer.
Hi, I'm Beth Citron. I'm the curator of modern and contemporary art at the Rubin Museum downtown. Leeza initially challenged me and a few others to come up with examples that supported Rashid's question about present elsewhere, simultaneous historical events that seem to happen completely autonomously. And I challenged that a little bit because I was concerned about the politics of it. You could look at, for example, the race to invent abstraction in Europe in the early 20th century and see firstly that there was abstraction happening all over the world before that in other cultures, and also that it was probably part of a zeitgeist where things were happening with some amount of communication, even if not direct. But I approached this with a little bit of skepticism, but I was really struck listening to Christopher and talking about social media in the literal sense, not in your hopeful sense for it, about how the possibility of these kind of simultaneous autonomous occurrences is going to be approaching zero probably quite soon, and how that's actually a shift from a time when there was a historical possibility of things happening truly in the present elsewhere. So that was something that struck me, and I also was really struck listening to the final two lectures about the space between reality and fiction, which is also part of a conversation that I've been having with Shahzad Dawood about his project Kalimpong, and how, particularly in the political moment that we find ourselves in, this is a really important question for us to be talking about and thinking through from various vantage points and sensibilities. So that's, in general, I'd rather hear more from all of you than continue to talk.
Thank you. I'm here because Rashid also wanted the presence of a feminine being, a woman, and at the end it didn't work out. In fact, we went 360 degrees around. I had proposed Christopher to him from the very beginning. So I just wanted to share that his not being here is not accidental, in case you didn't figure that out already. We had a lot of back and forths, and he had a really rough schedule, and we were trying to figure out if he could make it or not. And at some point I just said, your work has become more and more about not you, and particularly his Venice Biennial piece, where he had a live feed of people in Karachi, or is it Lahore? I don't know where. Was it Lahore? Oh, excuse me, thank you. Basically, live in the presence of everyone in Venice. So we could see them and they could see us. We were in a room and we could interact with each other and talk with each other, 24/7. Whoever was there and whoever was on this side could see each other. And so I thought, how would you feel about, I see this absence or this idea of you not being in your own work anymore. And he was shocked because he said, wow, I just proposed this work to Asia Art Archive about, which is called Present Elsewhere, where I basically, instead of making work, invite 15 others, curators and artists to remotely imagine what making work means to them and what they could do something with that. And he sent me this whole concept of remoteness that Christopher shared. You should absolutely read it in the booklet. You should read everything that's in the booklet. We put a lot of effort and love in it. So it's important. And what was fascinating was the whole I opened my statement by talking about that in the universe there is two opposite poles. One is order and the other one is chaos. And yet we think that we have control over this. And the only way we could deal with this is to deal with our internal space. How do we deal with chaos and order? And it was very interesting how that worked around the whole process, where both of us wanted to let it go, but we also wanted to control it. He was like, you choose whoever you want. And then he would be like, well, but maybe, let me see, what do you think? And then I didn't want to not include him, and there was this whole back and forth between us, which was really fabulous. There was a bit of a failure at the end where the two pieces we selected ended up not working out because they couldn't be present themselves. I called Christopher literally on Monday or Tuesday and said, hey, you know, you need to be present for this. So I'm so thankful for the challenge that Christopher Ho took on. He literally came up with this, what he just did for us in 4 days, and managed to be in field meeting the entire 2 days. So I can't tell you all the stories behind everything that has, you know, been put together here. I don't think it's necessary, but we do have a life after field meeting that we are very, very happy to have IBRA's, an online journal, critical journal that is going to catalog from now all the way until May of 2017 responses so all of you could actually send responses in whatever form you want, and we could find a way to catalog it as part of the aftermath of, you know, field meeting. And so if you felt absent by not asking your question today, you can somehow become present along the way. I have so much more to say, but we are out of time, and I want to apologize, and I also want to ask you permission for us to have an extra 15 to 20 minutes and ask you if you would please stay on, because we have another piece after this, and then we have the final thoughts by Stephanie, and we really want to make room for that so that we can sort of have a closure. Is that okay? Yes. Fabulous. I want to see if there's anything else that anyone wants to say before we close this discussion.
Had a comment.
No, please do, please.
No, it's just a difference between two kinds of absence. I would say there's an absence that can be a strategy, and there's a difference in the ontology of this absence. One that is it's strategy, it's just a commodity, and another one is due to a withdrawal of the representation without going to something that Omar knows quite well. It's when you have no other choice, like there's no representation. So this is a reference to Jalal Toufi, works on the withdrawal of representation after a catastrophe. So it's not the same kind of absence. Yes. It's important regarding certain context.
Yes. So I'm sorry, I just remembered one important thing. So the way that I interpreted Rashid Rana's idea of the remote or the absence or presence elsewhere, it's very interesting because we all have so many different ways of interpreting a particular idea, and that's where you say, take away objectivity, there is no such thing. But so my way of looking at it was, I thought about an artist in Uzbekistan who was completely isolated from this so-called, you know, other world because of the bipolar world of the, you know, Cold War, and in the same time as Namjoon Paik here in, you know, in the States or wherever he was working, he was this artist Vyacheslav Akhonov was also making like a whole series of installations and projects, large scale, but in his notebooks, and it involved monitors, obsessively about TV monitors. And it made me think about how we have been writing art history. We've been writing art history more from this perspective of the collective or the movement or a group of people in a particular center or in a particular area, and then someone has decided to tell the story because there's so many of us. And it made me think about this concept of, is there such a thing as one in all and all in one? Because how could it be possible for Vyacheslav to be making the same work almost exactly, maybe in different forms in another part of the world at the same time? And how many other things like that are actually happening simultaneously, and how can we connect? So my way of interpreting the remote was that the remote is a form of energy, and that it is something that we can tap into and you know, connect with without necessarily having any other agent. And that there is something possibly called the collective conscious that we could possibly share one another now, in the past, in the future, through this sort of cosmic existence of just ideas crisscrossing across the planet. Yes, she's shutting me down. Thank you.
Does that mean we all...
Yes, I'm very sorry. We have no more time.